I opened the door with a hand that trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the sudden weight of what this moment meant. She stood there in the hallway, just as calm and collected as she had been in the elevator, but there was something in her eyes now, something gentle, something waiting. For a second, neither of us said a word. Just stood there, the soft hallway light casting shadows around her, her hair tucked behind one ear, her lips parting slightly as if deciding what to say. "Hi," she said, barely above a whisper. I responded with a small nod, stepping aside, wordlessly inviting her in. She entered the room slowly, with a kind of respect, as though she knew this was more than just stepping into a hotel suite, it was stepping into something else entirely. Something delicate. Something neither of us had language for just yet. The room felt suddenly smaller with her in it. Not cramped, just more alive. She looked around with curious eyes, then settled into the armchair by the window while I hovered near the minibar, pretending to look for something. She asked me if I came to the city often. I told her not really, only when I needed to disappear. She smiled at that, a knowing smile, and said she understood exactly what I meant. Then silence crept in again, but it didn't feel awkward. It was quiet like the space between two soft breaths. I finally sat down at the foot of the bed, turning slightly to face her, unsure what to say next. "Do you do this often?" I asked, instantly regretting the bluntness. But she didn't seem offended. She just tilted her head and replied, "No." "Do you?" I shook my head, honestly. "I don't even know what this is." She didn't push. She didn't flirt, or tease, or try to steer the moment anywhere. She just let it breathe. I realized I was studying her, how she moved, how she held her coffee cup, the way her fingers traced the rim absent-mindedly. She looked up and caught me watching. I didn't look away. Neither did she. There was this invisible thread hanging between us, stretched tight and fragile. It pulled every time our eyes met, every time one of us shifted in our seat, every time we remembered what this night might become, that I told her my husband was away on business. That we'd been married 6 years, together even longer. I told her we loved each other, at least in the way people stay together when they don't want to be alone. I confessed it hadn't felt romantic in years. Just familiar. Safe. She listened without interrupting. When I stopped talking, she leaned forward and asked, "Are you happy?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to mean it. But I couldn't lie with her looking at me like that. I lowered my gaze, shrugged. "I'm not unhappy," I said instead. Her silence after that was the kind that wrapped around you like a blanket. She didn't fill it with noise or pity. She just let it exist. She told me she'd just gotten out of something messy. That she didn't want to talk about it, but also didn't want to be alone tonight. I nodded. I understood. Our reasons were different, but the ache was the same. The need to feel someone near you when everything else feels distant and dull. She stood up, walked over to me, slowly, giving me enough time to move if I wanted to. I didn't. She sat next to me on the bed, close enough to feel her warmth. My hands were in my lap, fingers tangled together tightly. Hers rested at her sides. There was maybe an inch of space between us, and yet the air felt thick with the closeness that we talked more. Quietly. About childhood memories. About the first time we each kissed someone. About the last time we cried in front of another person. Somewhere in that gentle exchange, the nervousness began to fade. Not entirely, but enough to let my body stop bracing. She turned her head toward me. I could feel the weight of her gaze. I turned too. We were inches apart. I could see the soft line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. She didn't lean in. She didn't assume. But she didn't look away either. It was me who moved. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a slight lean, a quiet breath, a pause between heartbeats. My face tilted closer, my lips parted just enough to test the moment. She didn't move. She waited. And just before we touched, I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest like it wanted to break out. I pulled back, not far, just enough. I whispered, I don't know what I'm doing. She smiled softly, reached out, and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear with the back of her hand. It's okay, she said. You don't have to. But her eyes, they stayed on mine. And in them, I saw no pressure, no judgment, just patience. And something else. Something warm. Something waiting. I sat there with her beside me, heart still racing, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't name. The weight of what almost happened sat between us, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. She didn't speak right away, and I was grateful for that. I needed the silence. I needed the space to listen to the storm going on inside me. My hands were still clasped in my lap, holding tight like they were afraid to let go. She stood up slowly, walked over to the little coffee station in the corner, and poured herself a glass of water. The sound of it pouring filled the room with something real. She took a sip and then offered me the glass without a word. I took it from her, fingers brushing lightly, and drank even though my throat was already dry with nerves. I thanked her quietly. She smiled, the kind of smile that says, you don't have to explain anything. She sat down again, this time further from me, like she was giving me room to breathe. I appreciated that more than she probably knew. We stayed like that for a while. Just sitting. Not touching. Not speaking. But the silence wasn't empty. It held all the words we hadn't yet said. I looked over at her and asked if she wanted to put on some music. She nodded. I scrolled through a soft jazz playlist on my phone and let it play. The low hum of a saxophone filled the room, easing some of the tightness in my chest. She leaned back into the armchair and sighed, like the weight in her own chest had softened too. That I asked her about her past, more out of curiosity than anything else. She shared in pieces. Said she had been in love once, years ago, with someone who made her believe in forever, until forever broke under the pressure of real life. She didn't say the person's name. She didn't have to. I could hear the sadness in her voice, the kind of ache you carry even after the wounds have healed. I told her I'd never really been with a woman. Not in any real way. That there had been moments in my life, glances, thoughts, things I never gave myself permission to explore. She didn't seem surprised. She just listened. We kept talking, softly, like the volume of our voices might break the fragile trust forming between us. I told her how I'd felt invisible for a long time. How marriage had slowly turned into a quiet partnership rather than a love story. I told her I didn't know if that was normal or if I just settled because I was scared to be alone. She listened with this open stillness that made me want to say more. So I did. I told her about the way I'd been feeling lately, disconnected, restless, like there was something missing and I didn't know what. Maybe you're just lonely, she said gently. I nodded, looking away. Or maybe I'm waking up. She reached over and took my hand in hers. Not forcefully. Just a soft, deliberate gesture. Her thumb brushed lightly over the back of my knuckles. I looked at our hands, then up at her. Her eyes were calm, searching. You don't have to do anything, she said. But if you want to feel something, I'm here. That moment stretched long and quiet. My chest rose with a shaky breath. I didn't move closer. I didn't pull away. I just let her hold my hand. It felt like enough. More than enough. Then she stood again, walked to the small round table by the window, and pulled out the chair across from her own. She motioned for me to come sit. I did. We sat across from each other, legs lightly brushing under the table. The night outside was dark, city lights blinking in the distance. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. I write when I can't sleep, she said. Sometimes it helps. She flipped through pages filled with messy handwriting, poetry, fragments of thoughts. She slid it over for me to read. I skimmed through lines that spoke of love and loss and longing. It felt like reading someone's soul that I asked if I could write something. She nodded. I picked up the pen tucked inside and hesitated. Then I wrote, I think I came here to feel something real. And I think I found it in you. I didn't look at her as I handed the notebook back. I was scared of what I might see in her face. But when I finally lifted my eyes, hers were already filled with something quiet and deep. She closed the notebook gently, like sealing a secret between us. Then she reached across the table, took my hand again, and just held it there. No rush. No expectation. Just presence. The minutes passed slowly after that. We didn't talk. We just stayed like that, holding hands in the dim light, jazz still playing in the background. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was beating soft, steady. Like it had found a rhythm it had been missing for years. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't need to. This was enough, for now. Just her hand in mine. Just the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was honest. And I hadn't felt honesty like that in a long, long time. The night deepened around us, and the world outside the window seemed to disappear entirely. The soft glow of the city lights faded behind a thin curtain, casting a warm amber hue across her face. I couldn't stop looking at her. There was something in the way she watched me, like she wasn't just seeing me but reading every word I wasn't saying. My hand was still in hers, and the warmth of her touch felt like an anchor in a moment that was slowly becoming more than just a passing connection. I didn't know what the rules were anymore. I didn't even know if I cared. All I knew was that I hadn't felt this awake in years. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. It was the way she looked at me like she wanted to know every corner of my mind. The way she didn't interrupt my silence, or fill it with meaningless words. The way she held space for me that I stood up slowly, still unsure of what my body wanted. I walked to the edge of the bed and sat down. She followed a moment later and sat beside me. This time closer. Close enough that our shoulders touched. We didn't speak. The air around us held a quiet pressure, like the still moment before a storm. Her hand brushed lightly against my arm, and I didn't pull away. Her fingertips lingered, soft and cautious. My breath caught, and for a moment I thought I might stop breathing altogether. Then she leaned in, slow, so slow I could have stopped her at any point. But I didn't. I leaned too. Our lips met with the gentlest pressure, like a question asked in a whisper. Her kiss was patient, exploring, as though she was learning the shape of my soul through every careful movement. My heart thudded hard, but not in fear. In recognition. As if something buried inside me was finally being seen, that I pulled back slightly, searching her eyes. There was no smugness there, no pride, just something vulnerable. Something raw. I reached up and touched her face, letting my fingers trail along her cheekbone. Her skin was warm, soft, real. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I nodded, though my voice wouldn't come out. I wasn't just okay. I was terrified and alive all at once. She kissed me again, deeper this time, and my hands slid slowly to her waist. Every movement was cautious, careful, like we were both afraid to break whatever spell had found us. Her body leaned into mine, slow and hesitant. She waited for me to lead. I moved with her, letting instinct guide me more than thought. It was unlike anything I had ever known, gentle but electric, fragile but consuming. She pushed my hair behind my ears, her fingers shaking just slightly. She was nervous too, and that made me feel safer. We lay back onto the bed, still wrapped in each other's gaze, still not rushing anything. Every inch of closeness was a silent agreement. No words. No labels. Just presence. I ran my fingers along her arm, feeling goosebumps rise under my touch. Her breath hitched, and she smiled through it. We undressed slowly, not as an act of lust, but one of trust. Every piece of clothing that fell away took with it a little more fear. A little more doubt. I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel guilty. I felt real. Wanted. Held. When our bodies finally pressed together, it was quiet. Not like the movies. There was no heavy soundtrack, no wild passion. Just softness. Intimacy. Her skin against mine, her breath in my ear, her hands mapping places no one had touched in years. I closed my eyes and let go. Of the rules. Of the guilt. Of the weight I'd been carrying for so long. I let her see all of me. And she didn't turn away. She held me. She kissed the parts of me I never thought deserved tenderness. It wasn't about sex. It was about being seen and being known. After, we lay there, tangled up in silence. Her head rested on my shoulder, and our legs overlapped like we had always belonged this way. The room was dim, the only sound the steady rhythm of our breathing. I turned my head and kissed her forehead. She murmured something I couldn't catch, and I didn't ask her to repeat it. I just held her tighter. My thoughts drifted to my husband, to my old life, to the choices I'd made to feel safe and stable. And then I thought about this night. This impossible, beautiful night. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow. I didn't know what this meant. But in that moment, I didn't need to know. I was here. With her. And for once, that was enough. The morning light crept in through the sheer curtains, soft and golden, settling over the hotel room like a gentle reminder that time hadn't stopped, even if it felt like it had. I opened my eyes slowly, not quite ready to face the real world. Her head was still resting on my shoulder, her arm draped over my waist like she belonged there. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't want to break whatever fragile peace had settled over us during the night. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every second of what had happened. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt too vivid, too present. Her warmth beside me, the way she breathed in her sleep, the way her fingertips had traced invisible lines across my skin. All of it had happened. And all of it was still here, lingering in the air around us. Eventually, she stirred, her body shifting gently against mine as she blinked awake. She looked up at me with sleepy eyes, her expression soft and open, like she wasn't trying to hide anything. I smiled without thinking. She smiled back. Neither of us spoke right away. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Safe. She ran her fingers lightly over my arm, tracing nothing in particular, just touching for the sake of it. I turned to face her fully, brushing hair from her face. "Did you sleep?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Better than I have in a long time." I believed her. I felt the same. That we got up slowly, both of us moving carefully, like any sudden motion might shift the feeling in the room. She wrapped a blanket around herself and sat near the window, watching the city wake up below. I poured us both coffee from the small machine in the corner and handed her a cup. She took it, her fingers brushing mine again, and that little touch still made my stomach flutter. We sipped in silence for a few minutes. I wanted to ask what this meant, what came next, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words. It felt too early, too heavy, too real. Instead, I asked her about breakfast. She laughed, soft and genuine, and said we should order something. We ate in bed, sharing pancakes and fruit and bits of conversation. She told me about a book she was reading, how it made her cry. I told her about the little things in my life, how I rearrange furniture when I'm anxious, how I keep a drawer full of old birthday cards because I can't throw them away. She listened, always fully present. That's what struck me most about her. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't pretending. When she looked at me, she really saw me. That was new. That was rare. After breakfast, she suggested we go for a walk. Let's get out of the room for a while, she said. I hesitated. Going outside felt like stepping back into reality. Into a world where what we had shared might not make sense. But she looked at me with those soft, hopeful eyes, and I nodded. We dressed slowly, still stealing small glances, quiet smiles, the occasional shy touch. As we walked through the hotel lobby, my heart pounded again, like I was doing something wrong. But her hand found mine, fingers lacing gently, and just like that, the fear melted. Outside, the air was cool and crisp. The streets buzzed with people, horns, movement. But somehow, with her beside me, it all felt quieter. We wandered aimlessly, through narrow alleys and wide avenues, past flower shops and cafes. She pointed out little details, funny signs, colorful doors, children playing with balloons. I found myself laughing, really laughing, and I couldn't remember the last time I had. With every step, I felt a little lighter. A little more like myself. That we stopped at a small park bench. She sat first, patting the space beside her. I joined, and we watched the world move around us. My thoughts drifted back to home. To my husband. To the life I had paused for this one night. Guilt crept in again, slow and cold. I told her about it. Not everything. But enough. She didn't flinch. She just nodded, her eyes steady. I know, she said. But maybe this doesn't have to be about wrong or right. Maybe it's just about being honest with yourself. Her words stayed with me, sinking deeper than I expected. That I looked at her then, not as a stranger, not even as a woman I spent the night with, but as someone who had opened a door in me that I didn't know existed. Someone who showed me what it felt like to be held without being fixed, touched without being claimed. The truth was, I didn't know where this would lead. I didn't even know what I wanted yet. But I knew I wasn't the same woman who walked into that hotel room the night before. And sitting beside her, watching the leaves flutter in the breeze, I felt something new. Not certainty. But possibility. Something that whispered, maybe it's okay to feel this way. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The day moved slowly, but I didn't mind. It felt good to exist without a schedule, without responsibilities pulling me back into the version of myself I had always known. We walked hand in hand through the quieter parts of the city, passing old buildings with chipped paint, corner bookstores, and small cafes with steamed windows. There was no rush between us, no pressure to talk constantly. Sometimes we just looked at each other and smiled. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. But the silence felt different now. It felt full, like it was holding space for something sacred. We found ourselves wandering into a tiny secondhand shop, the kind filled with mismatched teacups and worn-out novels. She picked up a vintage scarf and wrapped it around my neck with a playful grin, and I laughed, catching her wrist in my hand just for a moment. That tiny touch lit something warm inside me, a feeling that I could have sworn I forgot how to feel. We didn't buy anything, but we left the shop with more than we came in with. We carried something invisible between us. A thread, pulling gently. After an hour or so, she suggested we head back to the hotel. I hesitated for a beat, and she noticed. We don't have to, she said quickly, not wanting to make me uncomfortable. But I shook my head. No, I want to. And I meant it. The moment we stepped back into the hotel lobby, the air shifted again. The hum of the day started to settle, and reality began to tug at the edges of my thoughts. We rode the elevator in silence. Her hand brushed mine, and I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. Back in the room, everything looked just as we had left it. Our coffee mug still sat on the table. The bed was half made, pillows slightly crooked, and the morning light had faded into a softer glow that spilled in through the windows. She kicked off her shoes and collapsed gently onto the bed with a sigh. I sat down beside her, not quite ready to lie down yet. My mind was full of questions. What would I say to my husband? What would I say to myself? She turned her head to look at me, her voice low. You don't have to figure everything out today. I looked at her, then at the ceiling, then back at my hands. But I do, eventually. Don't I? She sat up beside me, her hand resting on my knee. Eventually, she said. But not this minute. This minute can just be ours. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself against the weight of that truth. I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were soft but steady, like she'd already made peace with the fact that this might only be temporary. That made something tighten in my chest that we lay back down side by side, facing each other. Her hand slid slowly into mine, her thumb brushing the inside of my wrist. She didn't say anything more, and neither did I. We just stayed like that, quietly close, our breath sinking without even trying. I could feel something shifting inside me. Not a decision, not yet. But an understanding. This wasn't just a break from routine. It wasn't an accident. It was a moment I needed, even if I didn't know why until now. After a while, she asked if I wanted to shower before dinner. I nodded, and she smiled, getting up to run the water. I watched her disappear into the bathroom, her movements calm and unhurried. I stayed there for a few minutes longer, thinking about how strange it was to feel both safe and undone in the same space. When I joined her, steam was already curling around the mirror, and the soft patter of water filled the room. She was sitting on the edge of the tub, fully dressed, waiting. I stepped in, and she reached for my hand again, guiding me into the warmth. We didn't rush. We moved like people who had nothing left to prove. Every touch was slow, thoughtful. There was no urgency, only care. She washed my hair like it meant something, and I let her. I let myself be seen in a way I never had before. Vulnerable, unguarded, bare. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She kissed my shoulder and said nothing. I leaned back into her, letting the water run over us like it was washing away everything that came before. Later, as we dried off and changed into clean clothes, the air between us grew heavier again, not from tension, but from the quiet awareness that time was slipping. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the walls. She made tea while I sat at the window, watching the sky melt into pink and orange. I could feel her watching me. I could feel her not wanting to ask the question that was floating between us. I turned to her finally. What if this is all I ever get? I whispered. What if this one day is all there is? She walked over, set the tea down, and knelt in front of me, her hands resting on my knees. Then let's make it count, she said. Let's remember every second. My throat tightened, and I reached for her again. I didn't care what came next. Not tonight. Tonight was still ours. We left the hotel again just before dusk, wrapped in coats and the kind of quiet that feels like a promise. The streets had changed with the fading light, taking on a softness that made everything seem slower, more meaningful. We walked without a destination, letting our steps find their own rhythm. She talked about small things, a childhood memory, a favorite movie scene, the smell of jasmine in her grandmother's backyard. I listened, not because I felt I had to, but because I wanted to memorize every part of her voice. There was something about the way she spoke, the gentle way she shaped her words, that made me feel like I was safe inside a dream I didn't want to end. We stopped at a small cafe tucked into the corner of a narrow street. The inside was dim and cozy, lit mostly by candles and tiny hanging lights. We sat in the back, far from everyone else, and she ordered us 2 glasses of wine. I wasn't even sure I liked wine, but when she handed me the glass, I took it anyway. Everything felt easier with her, like I didn't have to pretend to be anything I wasn't. She reached across the table and took my hand again, just as she had before, only this time it felt different. Her thumb moved slowly over my skin, and my chest tightened in that now familiar way. I wondered if she was feeling it too, that ache that came from knowing something beautiful couldn't last forever. We talked more over wine, about love and timing and all the things we wish we could have changed about the past. I told her about how I met my husband, how good things had been in the beginning. How we used to laugh for hours and drive around just to hear the same songs over and over again. Her eyes didn't judge. They held me while I spoke, giving me permission to say the things I had never admitted out loud. I told her about how everything slowly faded, the passion, the attention, the way he used to look at me like I was the only thing that mattered. She listened like it mattered. She held my hand like she understood. When we left the cafe, the sky had deepened into twilight, and the street lamps glowed like old secrets. We walked slower now. She kept close, her shoulder brushing mine, and I didn't want to reach the hotel. I wanted to stay in this in-between space forever. Not home, not somewhere new, just here, beside her. We passed a bookstore that was still open, its windows glowing with soft yellow light. She tugged my hand and pulled me inside. It smelled like dust and ink and something else, something old and comforting. We wandered through the narrow aisles together, speaking in whispers, touching book spines like they were treasures. She pulled a small poetry book from a high shelf and handed it to me. I opened it and read the first line out loud. It was about loving someone in silence, about the ache of wanting what you can't keep. Our eyes met. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. We bought the book and walked back to the hotel under a quiet night sky. The streets had emptied, and the world felt paused again. I held the book to my chest like it was a piece of her I could take with me when this all ended. When we got to the room, we didn't turn on the lights. The dim blue glow from the city outside was enough. She kicked off her shoes and lay down on the bed, her arms open in silent invitation. I joined her, pressing myself into the space where her body fit perfectly against mine. We lay like that for a while, not speaking, just breathing. I traced circles on her back with my fingers and listened to the sound of her heartbeat. She whispered something then, so softly I almost didn't catch it. "You're not the only one who's been hiding." I looked at her, waiting. "I've been pretending too," she continued. "Pretending I don't need anyone. Pretending I don't want to be seen." Her voice cracked slightly, and I felt something break open inside me too. I touched her face gently, brushing my thumb across her cheekbone. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said. She smiled, but her eyes were wet. I leaned in and kissed her slowly, deeply, not because it was expected, but because it was the only thing I knew how to do in that moment. She kissed me back with the same quiet desperation, the same unspoken need to hold on to something that felt too big to name. That we didn't make love that night. We didn't need to. We just held each other under the thin hotel blanket, tangled in warmth and silence, the poetry book lying open on the nightstand. Outside, the city moved on without us. Inside, time felt suspended. I didn't think about my husband. I didn't think about consequences. I only thought about her. The way she made me feel like I was more than just a wife or a role. Like I was still a woman. A person. Someone worth holding, even if just for one night more. I drifted to sleep in her arms, with her breath against my neck and her hand resting on my heart. And for the first time in so long, I didn't feel alone. Morning came quieter than I expected. The light was pale, washed out, soft like the end of a song. I opened my eyes and found her still beside me, her arm draped across my stomach, her breath slow and steady. I stayed still, afraid that even the smallest movement might bring the weight of reality crashing down. My phone buzzed from somewhere across the room, and I flinched. I didn't move to check it. I didn't want to know. I knew what it was, texts from my husband, checking in, reminding me that my life outside this room still existed. The guilt crept in slowly, like a shadow climbing up the wall. I turned my face toward her. She was already watching me. Her expression was soft, knowing. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. But I felt like I did. "He's coming home today," I said quietly. The words felt like a betrayal just to speak. She nodded, her fingers brushing against my arm. I figured. We sat up slowly, as if our bodies knew this was the beginning of the end. The room felt different now. Still warm, still ours, but tinged with something fragile. Like a bubble that had started to thin. She got up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just a bit. "You don't have to explain," she said, her back still to me. I knew what this was. I hated hearing that. It made everything feel smaller, like we were already rewriting what this had meant. "But it wasn't just a night," I said. She turned to face me then, her eyes glossy but calm. "No," she replied. "It wasn't. It was something I'll carry. Always." I stood and walked toward her, closing the space between us until I could reach her hand. "I don't know what happens next," I said, my voice low and unsteady. "I don't know what this means for me. For him. For anything." She gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to know yet," she said. "But whatever you decide, don't erase this. Don't pretend it didn't matter." I nodded, swallowing the tight lump in my throat. We sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders touching, eyes locked on some invisible point in the distance. There was nothing left to plan. Nothing to hope for. Just this moment. One last stillness before the goodbye we both knew was coming. She started to gather her things, slowly, carefully, like each item held a memory she didn't want to disturb. I watched her pack, each motion deliberate, respectful. I wanted to stop her, to ask her to stay, but I knew I couldn't. She folded her scarf, the one she'd wrapped around my neck in that little shop, and paused before slipping it into her bag. Then, without a word, she took it out again and handed it to me. "For you," she said. I clutched it tightly, pressing the fabric to my chest. It smelled faintly of her perfume, something floral and soft, something I'd remember for a long time. She stood by the door for a few moments before opening it, looking at me like she was trying to memorize my face. I walked over and wrapped my arms around her. We didn't say goodbye. Neither of us wanted to give the moment a title it didn't deserve. We just held on, and then slowly, she let go. She stepped into the hallway, her silhouette framed in the doorway like the last scene of a movie. She looked back once, offered a small smile, and then she was gone. That I closed the door slowly, leaning against it as the silence roared around me. The room felt hollow now, like something sacred had been lifted out of it. I sat on the bed and held the scarf in my hands, pressing it to my face to hold on to what little I had left of her. My phone buzzed again, louder this time, insistent. I stared at it. I knew I'd have to answer eventually. I knew I'd have to return to the life I came from. But in that moment, I just wanted to sit in the stillness a little longer, let the memory of her linger, let my heart ache without interruption. Everything had changed. I just didn't know how to name it yet. All I knew was that she had opened a part of me I thought had been closed forever. And now that it was open, I wasn't sure I could ever shut it again. The quiet stayed with me even after I left the hotel. I walked slowly through the city, every step feeling heavier than the last. The scarf she gave me was tucked carefully inside my bag, like a secret I didn't want to let go of. The streets were alive with movement, cars, people, laughter, but I felt like I was floating just outside of it all, like I didn't quite belong anywhere anymore. I passed by the cafe where we had sat just the day before, and the memory of her fingers wrapped around mine came rushing back so vividly I had to stop for a second to catch my breath. I kept walking, and with every block, the hotel got further behind me, but she didn't. She was still there, in the way my body hummed with emotion, in the way my skin remembered the warmth of her touch, in the way my mind kept replaying every glance, every word, every silence we had shared. When I finally reached home, the house looked exactly the same as when I had left it. Too quiet. Too still. I stood in the hallway for a long moment before walking in, setting my bag down gently like I didn't want to disturb the air. My husband's suitcase was by the door. He was already back. I heard the low hum of the television from the living room. I closed my eyes, pressing my back to the door, bracing myself for the life I had stepped away from, even if only for a little while. Part of me wished he wouldn't notice. That he wouldn't look at me too closely. That I could quietly return to what we had and pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And I couldn't pretend that he came around the corner a moment later, smiling when he saw me. "Hey," he said, walking over to wrap his arms around me. I let him, but my body didn't lean in the way it used to. My arms went around him loosely. My mind drifted somewhere else. "How was your trip?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. "Fine," I murmured. "Just needed a break." He didn't press. He never really did. And maybe that was part of the problem. We sat down later, had dinner, made small talk. I watched him as he spoke about meetings and airports, and I found myself wondering how many times I'd sat across from him, smiling, nodding, pretending I was still fully present when my heart had already started slipping away. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, I reached into the drawer where I had placed the scarf. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the soft fabric against my skin. I thought about her, how she made me feel seen, how her touch made me remember I still had parts of myself that were waiting to be loved. I hadn't just cheated. I had awakened. I had opened a part of myself I'd long buried under routine and silence and the dull ache of loneliness. And now that it was open, it was loud. It refused to be ignored. I turned on my side, facing away from him, tears slipping silently onto the pillow. I wasn't crying out of regret. I was crying because I didn't know how to go back. Because I didn't want to forget her. And because I knew that pretending I hadn't changed would be a slow, quiet death of the person I had just started to find again. The next morning, I woke up early. I stood by the window, wrapped in a robe, staring out at the still, gray sky. My phone sat on the windowsill. I picked it up and scrolled until I found her number. I had saved it under a name no one would recognize. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure. What would I say? What could I possibly offer her, knowing I was still tied to a life I wasn't ready to leave? And yet, I couldn't let her disappear like a dream. I typed slowly, deleting and retyping several times before settling on something simple. Asterisk, I don't know what happens next. But I'm thinking of you. Asterisk, I stared at the message, then hit send. It felt like sending a piece of my heart into the unknown. That I stayed by the window for a while, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for something inside me to settle. When the reply came, it was just a few words. Asterisk, me too. I'll be here. Asterisk, that was all. But it was enough. Enough to let me breathe again. Enough to remind me that even if this didn't have a name, even if it didn't fit neatly into the life I'd built, it still mattered. She still mattered. And I did too. So I got dressed. I made coffee. I kissed my husband on the cheek like I always did. But inside, I was different. I was still her in my thoughts, still that woman in the hotel room who let herself be vulnerable, who let herself feel. Maybe I wouldn't leave right away. Maybe I wouldn't break everything open all at once. But I wouldn't lie to myself anymore. I wouldn't let the silence swallow me again. Whatever this had been, whoever she had been to me, it had reminded me that I was still alive. And that was something I was never going to let go of. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real, emotional, and faceless love stories like this one. Drop a comment below. Have you ever felt something so unexpected it changed everything? Share your thoughts. And if this story made you feel seen, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. New love stories are coming every week. Don't miss them. Turn on the bell icon so you're the first to know when they drop.